really multifaceted natural world Salish Sea specialist. She's going to be laughing. She earned a PhD in geography from Edinburgh University and has been a sessional lecturer at UVic for decades. Founding member of the Land Conservancy of BC and GERT, I think I remember, and has worked as a naturalist with ecotour and education operators for 25 years and just returned from a week on the Maple Leaf doing the south of the Salish Sea in the best weather. That was well done. She's a pioneer of community mapping, developing exhibits and signage for many parks and museums. You may have seen a few hosted around the Gulf Islands. Many awards, including the writer of creative nonfiction books. And she's written over 500 publications for newspapers, magazines, too much to name. She's also an artist and very much loved all of her pen and ink drawings, her wonderful journals that she keeps, and her watercolor mandalas, which are in both public installations and private collections. So, fifth generation Vancouver Islander from Salt Spring Island. Welcome, Briony.
Thank you, Anne. I just like to say that I want to acknowledge Anne because she was my biology teacher. So this is a real pleasure to be working with Anne. I'm sitting on the shoulders of my teachers. So, okay, I'll just get started on my share. Hopefully you're seeing a watercolor, one of my watercolors of herring amongst other species. So in terms of the answers to the questions, there's a lot of responses right in this drawing itself. So what I'm going to do today is take you into some places and the long experiences of some people that have lived with the herring, including my family, and to try and zero in on a kind of, there's kind of a mystery involved as well. And so I'm going to take you on a kind of geographical journey, a chronological, and also through that journey is to meet all the plants and animals that rely on herring. So I'm just getting my little. I want to acknowledge, first of all, we started something called the Herring Conservation and Restoration Society, and I want to acknowledge my board, who are an amazing group of fishermen, biologists, sailors, elders, educators, and we've even got Harriet the Herring there. It's a fairly newly created society set up to really help educate people about herring, and I want to acknowledge all of them. And I also want to acknowledge, so one of our board is Eric Pelkey, who's down on the right, and he is the hereditary chief of this area. And I am living in his territory of Huananich, which is also known as Fulford Harbour. He's the great grandson of Louis Pelkey, and the significance of this lineage is that Louis was one of the leaders and the hereditary chief of what's now known as Salt Spring, and stood up in front of the Indian Reserve Commission over 100 years ago and talked about the mismanagement of herring, also the importance of herring, not just to his community, but to everything. So the teachings of Louis passed down to his great-grandson, and then Eric's generosity of sharing his knowledge with all of us I want to deeply acknowledge. So I'm going to start with this picture. So this is one of the earliest pictures of the herring camps in the gorge. And the gorge over in Esquimalt territory was a really significant population of herring. It had a very specific timing. It was critical to the kind of people in the very earliest part of the spring. And in Western scientists, people like Dr. Yogi Karlsfeld has been looking at that population, and it was definitely a distinct and unique genome. So this is one of the places I'm sort of focusing in on. And it also happens to be the place where my family, settlers, moved at right at the same time that that photograph was taken. And so I've got a sort of history of being passed down of my families, of living in these areas, and sort of, stories of abundance. And and this area, we'll come back to the gorge because of its sort of significance in trying to uncover this mystery. The other place that I want to focus in on is Huenanich, Fulford Harbour. Fulford Harbour on Salt Spring Island. This is a picture taken by my great granny. She's one of the little girls that was standing in the previous picture. And this is another really important herring site, spawning site historically. And this is where my family, the next generation, were settlers here. And this is one of the pictures of their neighbors. This is the Joseph family who lived in the only reserve that was created on Salt Spring, which was part of the issue that Louis Palkey was taking to the Indian Reserve Commission around this time, when all these crazy reserves were being made. So this is my family next door out fishing. And so part of my growing up was hearing stories of, the abundance that would happen in the spring, and also, witnessing it myself. And so there would be stories of the blackfish coming in. Blackfish was the old name for orca, especially after the Chinook, that were after the herring, that there were sea ducks everywhere. And certainly this was all part of, what was known at the time. This was kind of the baseline. This is an article from the Times, or no, it's from the Colonist, and it's about herring. And it's just like the sentence at the bottom says, "Our shores are swarming with them." So the colonists were kind of like, we got to make use of these. We have all this surplus, So that was my understanding, as a young person, that herring were just so abundant that no one even had to regulate their fisheries. And in 1982, I went over to Scotland, and I was working there in a very impoverished landscape of Scotland, and actually worked on a herring museum. And it was about the loss of the herring fisheries due to overfishing. And I remember thinking, man, like it could happen in British Columbia. And the very mechanisms that were happening, overfishing and some of the disturbances in these fishing grounds, and the treatment of the fishery as a kind of just one big big amorphous uber population was one of the problems that had been identified in Scotland at the time. Anyway, so I came back in 1994, and one of the first things I did was to go and interview a lot of the elders. And this was both First Nations elders and local people, and my family. I think one of my cousins, Nancy Braithwaite, and said, what did Fulford Harbour look like? And what was there? And it's hard to see what's in this map, but this is essentially the theme of this talk, which is herring were the foundation for life in these islands. Everything fed either directly or indirectly on herring. Everything, right up to the wildflowers on the islets and the camas, because they were the herring were dragged up onto these islets, and they provided the fish fertilizer for all this incredible flower gardens that were harvested, and the main sort of starch. And you can see in the picture maybe just all the different birds right here. There was, and I'll go through some of these in a minute, but just to sort of see that in this in this little harbor, there was so much abundance, and it was all tied around this herring spawn. And one of the people I interviewed said herring used to spawn in Fulford Harbor every spring. And it was every spring, sometimes in such numbers that the roe would carpet the harbor. The last spawn was in 1983. So what happened in 1983? Well, I just did a little close-up. I'm just going to show you, start giving you some clues. If you look to the just below where it says Fulford, there's a big long bank of gravel, shallow area, and it was full of eelgrass. And that was one of the the main attractions of Fulford, is that there was this big long nursery where the herring would come in and lay their eggs. And you can see a few of those scoters and western grebes and things that were part of the entourage that came in with the herring spawn. The other thing that happened in this, particularly in Fulford Harbor, is that round the corner was this big, deep area of Sansom Narrows. And it was like big, deep waters where the herring could go around the corner, and some of them could overwinter and have like just a large amount of nutrients. And those formed a sort of very important what the fishermen referred to as these bait balls during the winter. And these are the winter resident populations. So that's sort of the context to what the mystery that we're going to be talking about. Okay, a lot of this map came from the Elliots. Now I'm going to play you a little clip, and while I'm setting it up, I want you to, if you can turn up your volume, because it's very soft. John Elliot, or Stolzel, is going to be talking, and he's speaking in both Sanchothan and in English. And if you can kind of pick up, and he's going to be talking about the big herring balls in Saanich Inlet and the little bird, the marbled murrelet, or quaquaquats. So I'm just going to play it now.
I can only speak about my personal experience and information that I was given by our father. He was extreme.
Okay.
Seagulls were eating, the ducks were eating, the salmon were eating, and even the cod were eating. Eat low, wouldn't it? So Allah at the day, slung it. We were also there gathering up the herring in that time. And then only the not meat and milk. This one little duck, meat and two konangs, two sisters, two konangs, this quaggies. And he could just question this, says, quackwats. This little duck, his name is quackwats. He's a little one, about that big. Quackwats. So net them, they colonate them to sing marble mirror at just question this. So I know Chuck's chase, and I know to who I to connect ngakang to ngakang to touch to connect so yeah, kwalang yeah, the meatman mark let's like so Salish to connect the slang let's just let's say what, and he dives down. He's the best diver. He dive really deep, and he goes and he flies underwater. He's fast. Oh, Stuart, he's really good at diving, that guy, even though he's the smallest little duck. Right, so this question chase, so they slang it, and so say nung they so shall say to connect say so connect so you tell qua thằng thế so ngăn màu to connect say so so ấy ngắc không. Yeah, the ducks had a good dive and then they join in. So shall they go pass it there, they gather together. So to connect. To connect la to chuck ball to connect la into a big ball. It's almana to squishness to call this almana.
Okay. It's a beautiful audio recording of the two brothers, Dave Elliott Sr.'s sons, and he's singing that. I don't know if you could hear, but the sklonet is the herring, and it's the the role that the little marbled murrelet, and I'll be showing you one in a minute, played, that their real relationship to the quack-quacks, quack-quack-quacks, because they formed the herring into a ball, and then the families could go out and they could rake the herring and bring the herring in. And so they considered, you know, like everybody is working together with the herring to feed on and to steward. So this particular was a project that I worked on that also kind of located herring right at the heart of life. And this is the 13 moon calendar. And if you look at sort of at about 2 o'clock, you can see Wekis. Wekis is February, and it's called the moon of the frog. And when the frogs, the tree frogs, specific tree frogs, started singing, that was the trigger, and that in the storytelling, that was the time that, you know, you start looking out for herring. And so everything within this 13 moon calendar are stories that are kind of at the foundation is the herring and the role of the herring to feed people with really important omega-3 oils right at the start of the spring. And so the herring were bringing oils to everything. And so when you heard John Elliott or Stolzel singing, he's singing about this little creature here, this little brown bird with the two herring lying sideways or perpendicular to its beak. This drawing itself was developed in association with elders from Awikino, which is Rivers Inlet, Kitasoo, people elders in Klemtu, and New Hawk elders in Bella Coola. So up and down the coast, the marbled murrelets were identified as like key helpers and indicators of herring. And if you saw herring, a marbled murrelet with two or more herring crosswise in their bill, it was an indication that the marbled murrelets were breeding, that the crabs would be good, that the spawn would be good, and then you see the black bear in the background. It meant that the bears could put on enough fat to raise two cubs. There was all sorts of indicators of a really healthy environment, and herring was at the foundation of that. And so here's the little squawk-quacks. And this is in an inshore setting where the herring during February, March, they come in out of the depths, either from offshore or the depths. If they're resident, they're coming in from the deep waters into the shallower waters. And then this drawing is of the offshore. So there was a percentage of the herring went out to sea, and in the offshore, you had other species that were feeding on the herring, like the rhinoceros auklets and these seamounts and the humpback whales and on. So I'm going to do now a little bit of a sort of survey just taken from a year on the wild side of some of the species that are really, if they're not directly, they're so closely tied in the web of life to herring that they wouldn't do so well without it. So first I'm just going to show you the orca, the southern residents that are, you know, entirely dependent on Chinook, and Chinook are entirely dependent on herring. It is a direct relationship. There's the harlequin duck, these beautiful, beautiful ducks that really rely on that oil of the Pacific and the nutrients of the herring spawn to get their enough nutrients for the breeding season when they fly into the interior and breed in the big interior rivers. The humpbacks have developed all these feeding mechanisms for also herding the herring into balls, like the bubble net feeding, and then coming up through it with their huge jaws and siphoning it through the baleen. And if you've ever seen a humpback bubble net feeding on a herring ball, it's one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. I think. There's the little squawquawats, the marbled murrelet, and then there's the other alcids. There's many alcids, all of which are called bait birds because they're just out there at these winter bait balls. The western grebe, these beautiful, beautiful grebes that relied on the oil of the herring all through the winter, 96% of the population has dropped because these wintering locations have been lost. And so they're also part of this mystery that I'm going to talk about in a little while. This is from one of my sketchbooks in Alaska where you're in it's the sort of vibrancy that we used to have in the Salish Sea. And so I can only imagine what it was like, prior to the big industrial fisheries, but down here. But this is kind of the mood that you have when you're out with a herring ball with the eagles coming in. We're still seeing some of this in Hornby, Denman, but this used to occur everywhere through the Salish Sea. Pacific white-sided dolphins, they love herding forage, and we used to probably have more Pacific white-sided dolphins. Now they're starting to come back, but they really are dependent on it. So these are just a few of the species that are reliant on herring. So what happened? So I was saying that in 1983, the herring stopped spawning in Fulford Harbour. And so I was working on these stories with elders and fishermen and data of fisheries and oceans and listening to fishery scientists. And it was very clear that the orca were declining, Chinook were declining, and so were herring. And these things were related, and how are we going to, work on one without the others? So the information coming out of fisheries and oceans was that there was these continuing declines. They were still continuing to fish with a particular model and of 20% of the biomass estimated. But it's a faulty kind of a model. And there was still not a real explanation of why something even more mysterious was happening. Now, I want you to look at the blue dots. You're going to notice in a minute that they're going to start declining. What these blue dots are specific herring sites like the Gorge, like Fulford, like Ganges, like Cowichan, like Saanich Inlet, like around Esquimalt. Those early pictures I was showing you. And you'll suddenly see that they're all disappearing all around Pender, Maine, Saturna. The one that went was Saanich Inlet. So now we're left with a few, and even those, this particular diagram was done using Fisheries and Oceans data, and it ended in around 1990. And we've suffered even more losses since then. So what's happening? And in the past, the Fisheries and Oceans recognized that there were resident herring, that there were these very specific, every kind of like little bay that had the right requirements of eelgrass and a nearby deep water and just the right conditions for spawns had a spawning population. And so a wonderful project was launched in 2011. Dana Lipovsky was the sort of principal investigator, and she went and interviewed fishermen and knowledge keepers up and down, all the way to Alaska.
Department of Fisheries and Oceans decided that they were going to open up a terminal fishery, a commercial fishery here in front of the village, and in Malaspina Strait from Grief Point all the way up to Dinner Rock. So it was all seiners basically that came in, and they would blow the horn, and away they'd go and go on with the bonanza and collect all their herring they could, right? So they did that 3 years in a row. And it was after that, probably not the next year, but the year after, 2 years later, that you could see a decline happening with the return of the herring. So the questions were posed, at that point, that to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, we wanted an answer as to why, they thought that the herring was in decline. And, they kind of put us aside and pushed us back and and it didn't really have an answer for us right away. So, we took it for granted that it was the seine fishery that decimated the stock, and so eventually they came back to us with their answer is that the herring that did come here into Malaspina Strait in front of the village, Scuttle Bay, was not was basically a transient herring that came here and milled around here, and as they're ready to spawn, they would leave and head for Vancouver Island, Denman Island, Hornby Island, that area to spawn there. And I thought that was a weak excuse, to us for that, as we understand.
Oops, sorry. So that what is said in that particular clip was reiterated all the way up and down the coast. And fishermen were saying the same thing. The seiners came in, they removed the herring spawn, and then sometimes they'd come back in the winter bait fisheries, and they would do the same thing again on these winter resident populations. And so in 2015, a group of fishery scientists started something called the Ocean Modeling Forum and asked the very important question: can we better incorporate what we're hearing from all these coastal communities and the dimensions that they're introducing into the management of herring and their ecosystems? And they discovered three really critical points. One, that local herring populations matter, so that these distinct populations in Fulford, in Ganges, in Saanich Inlet, in the Malaspina, and on and on and on. And the same, and I might say the same stories are going on all the way up the coast. So local herring populations matter, which means you need that all of us that are living with a particular herring population, it matters. They aren't just one big group of fish that swim around and decide where to live. They are, in fact, they have been distinct herring populations, and that they like going home. And then the second thing is that young herring follow their elders. And one of the big changes in herring has been that there's been a loss of elders, which is sort of being paralleled in populations around the world. So that some of the stories that I've heard are where the elders are literally leading the young back into their spawning grounds. And so that role and that cultural role, which we don't understand at all, we only have inklings of, but that we now know that there is this really important cultural element to herring. And then the other point that came out of the forum was that we have to manage herring at a bay-to-bay basis. And I used this picture here of the Squamish Nation, who's initiated a restoration project, and it's a wonderful project. And the sort of quick short story is that they'd had, like all the other places, they'd had a spawning population, and they decided they were going to try and welcome their herring back. So they laid out the traditional hemlock boughs, and the school kids went and laid them, and they had a ceremony, a welcoming home ceremony. And that year, the herring actually spawned on those hemlock boughs, and they've continued the ceremonies every year, and they've started an amazing monitoring program. So it's a real success story, and it's a real model. So the management solutions exist, which is we need to give a right for First Nations to manage herring in the way that they did for thousands of years, and we also need to apply the most recent science, because we've got some wonderful fishery scientists that have discovered these genetic markers of these distinct populations. Some spawn early, some have different morphologies and things like that, but there's these amazing genetic markers. So following the ocean forums, Eric Pelkey and Seout and the Wasanic Leadership Council had a forum called Chalites Lane, which is Let the Herring Live. And I'm just going to show you briefly some of the graphic note-taking that I did during that, that captures some of the ideas that were going on, and also gives you a sense of just the importance, not just in the whole ecosystem, but the entire culture. So, what we learned was that, these knowledge keepers were holding all the key knowledge about these herring populations. Families were managing these herring sites, and each family had that voice, and that people would travel to learn things from one another. People supported one another with knowledge. If a particular bay adjacent to another one didn't spawn one year, they would move herring down and repopulate. And that happened, say, between the villages of Pakachin and Sartlip, which are just adjacent. So this is the second half of that note-taking. These are some of the ideas that people wanted to do, which was they wanted to work together. So we had environmental organizations, First Nations, people involved in restoration and ecotourism. And, what can we do to try and restore these not only these historic herring stocks, but all the other abundance in the Salish Sea? And these are some of the ideas, everything ranging from eelgrass and kelp restoration to stopping the commercial fishery until stocks recovered, education and the really trying to address traditional or to implement traditional management practices into fisheries and oceans. So I have a beautiful, I'm going to end with a beautiful Silver Highways, which is a film that was written by Grant Scott of the Hornby Island Conservancy, and a filmmaker from Hornby, Rebecca Benjamin Carey. And this really this will give you the visual, why should we care about herring? Because they really are the foundation of all life.
We always were taught, never take everything. You always leave something for the future of your people.
In the cold, clear waters of British Columbia, a story of resilience unfolds. Pacific herring, the unsung heroes of the coast, have been supporting coastal communities and ecosystems for countless generations. Their annual spawn nourishes all life on the coast. Herring spawns stretching kilometers along shorelines were once a common sight. And while herring still spawn in some of these areas, these events are only a shadow of their past glory. The decline in herring populations threatens the entire marine ecosystem. But hope remains in a special group of herring who hold the fate of the coast on their tiny silvery backs. This is the story of the Pacific herring, who embark on an epic annual migration, traveling hundreds of kilometers from the west coast of Vancouver Island to the Salish Sea, where the last major herring spawning event takes place. The banks off the southwest coast of Vancouver Island are an abundant feeding ground for marine life. Nutrient-rich currents rise from the ocean depths and onto the banks, sparking blooms of microscopic algae, which feed swarms of krill and other tiny animal plankton. All summer long, the herring gorge themselves on krill, building up strength for their incredible journey ahead. When winter's chill sets in, an age-old instinct guides them towards their spawning grounds. Those destined for the Salish Sea embark on a journey hundreds of kilometers long through treacherous waters. All along their path, these great schools of small silver fish are preyed upon by myriad species, providing nourishment like a moving feast for the entire marine food web. Their journey takes them through the Strait of Georgia, devoured by hungry Chinook and coho salmon. Chinook salmon make up 80 to 90% of the southern resident killer whale diet, so they too rely heavily on herring. As they round the southern tip of Vancouver Island, some of the herring head south towards Puget Sound in search of a place to spawn, while others bravely forage north, venturing into dangerous territory where swarms of seabirds and sharp-toothed sea lions readily pounce on their long-awaited feast. This journey isn't just crucial for marine life. Bears, wolves, and even forests reap the rewards of herring. Yet, it is among the indigenous peoples who have lived along these shores since time immemorial that the true importance of herring shines.
The excitement we got when the herring season did come. Even though we had herring pretty well year-round around here, but when the big great herring runs did come, it was generally considered to be by our people to be the great time of feast.
My grandmother lived to be 104 years old, and her diet, was of salmon and cod and herring.
Once upon a time, herring were abundant up and down the west coast. Haida Gwaii, Prince Rupert, the Central Coast, the Strait of Georgia, and the west coast of Vancouver Island were all major spawning sites. The abundance of herring presented great economic opportunities for local fishery workers in the early 20th century. In the 1970s, the roe herring fishery emerged due to the growing demand for herring roe, especially from Japanese markets. It soon became one of British Columbia's most valuable fisheries. But the herring stocks couldn't keep up with the industry's rapid expansion. Over time, industrialized overfishing and habitat degradation took their toll on herring populations, causing most to dwindle and some to disappear. Despite falling numbers, there remains one place where herring still gather in great numbers. Today, the largest herring spawning beds are off the eastern coast of central Vancouver Island. Herring favor this area for its abundant eelgrass beds and shoals of plankton. The waters surrounding Hornby and Denman Islands are at the epicenter for one of nature's most spectacular events. As February draws to a close and March approaches, anticipation lingers on the coast. It's the height of herring spawning season, and schools of herring hold up in deep waters off Hornby and Denman Islands, preparing to spawn. When the time is right, great schools head into the shallows, wave after wave. Female herring, laden with up to 30,000 maturing eggs, lay their sticky roe on intertidal rockweed and shallow water kelp and eelgrass, while males coat the eggs with milt. The seas are transformed into a kaleidoscope of glacial shades of white, turquoise, and aquamarine. So many animals have been waiting for this fruitful moment after a long and desolate winter. Sea lions amass by the hundreds, gulls flock by the thousands, hunting both herring and their eggs. Diving ducks hunt the herring offshore, and seabirds overwintering in the Salish Sea, along with those migrating to their northern nesting grounds, seize this opportunity to fatten up on the fish and their roe. Eagles soar overhead. They're beginning to nest and need the energy reserves from the herring to lay and hatch their eggs and nurture their eaglets. Amid all the noisy fray, patient herons hunt. They're joined by otters, minks, and many others. This remarkable wildlife phenomenon lasts only weeks, sometimes only days. Masses of herring, having survived the rush of hungry predators and giving life to a new generation, disperse, making their way back to deeper, safer waters. After a flurry of frenzied activity, the calm returns, and coastlines glimmer with blankets of herring eggs. Two weeks after fertilization, tiny, slender herring larvae emerge from the eggs. Drifting about in the currents, the larvae feed on the tiniest plankton. After 4 to 5 months, they have taken on the shape of silver-sided herring. But the ocean is full of creatures hungry for herring, and only a tiny fraction of the larvae have survived so far. Many eggs never hatched, instead tossed by ocean waves high up onto beaches at the mercy of the scorching sun. But the tiny herring that survive grow quickly and join other juvenile herring in schools. After their first summer, they have grown to half the length of an adult herring and hunt for food in protected bays and shores, feeding on krill-like plankton. For the next 2 to 3 years, the juvenile herring feed in the Salish Sea. But in the late spring of their 3rd year, the juveniles are ready to follow the elder herring on their migration back to the open Pacific. And so off they head, around the southern end of Vancouver Island, back to the offshore banks where they feed for the summer, and where they will feed until they get the urge to return to the Salish Sea, forming the Silver Highway once again.
The loss of herring is not just about the loss of food in our diet. It's going to be the loss of everything.
It's so important to realize the importance of the herring in the life cycle of our oceans. I'm a First Nations person, but everybody has to participate, and everybody has to undo the wrongs that we've done to this ocean. It's time that we reevaluated our impact on the ocean.
Okay. I'm just going to leave you with some sources, and if anyone is interested in joining the Herring Society, just go to savetheherring.org. It's a great little group. We love volunteers, and yeah, here's our goals. Protect and restore local herring populations, create respectful conversations, and support community restoration efforts. So I will stop sharing, and I think that's the end.
Marvelous. Thank you so much. Oh, learned so much. That is just a beautiful film. We should put, is there a link for the film? Can it be watched again? Or is
I'm
it?
not sure. We're gonna probably be putting it on YouTube, but I just the filmmaker, we did a kind of what do you call it? I think the launch actually was in Salt Spring.
Oh, right. I remember this some months ago. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So
So,
at some stage the filmmaker's gonna put it on YouTube, but yeah.
well, okay. We will stay tuned for that. And that was just beautiful. Thank you so much.
All right, excellent. Well, I'm very pleased to welcome Kendra to the presentations tonight. She's going to tell us about life on the rocks, race rocks, that is. Kendra is a registered veterinary technologist working in marine mammal rescue since 2018. Her career has taken her across diverse fields of animal care, from penguins and elephants to shark research and sea turtle rehabilitation. When she's not working, she can be found at Race Rocks, also working, or hiking on the North Shore with her dog Gary, looking for whale spouts from any viewpoint they come across. Welcome, Kendra. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here and talk a little bit about life on the rocks. This is probably my second favorite photo of Race Rocks. It was taken by the Prince of Wales Ecotourism Company. It's actually on their website. And I will show you my first favorite photo coming up shortly. But to start off, I will start with a little bit about me. So my name is Kendra Luckow. As Joan mentioned, I'm a registered vet tech, and I work full-time with the Vancouver Aquarium's Marine Mammal Rescue Society. I grew up in Tsawwassen. I spent my whole life exploring tide pools on the water with my dad in his boat, and doing whatever I can in the marine mammal field. I've also spent some time working with Fisheries and Oceans Canada on their marine mammal rescue and response team as well. So very marine mammal-y kind of background, but I'll start off talking a little bit about Race Rocks Ecological Reserve and what it is, and all of the biodiversity there, as well as my role as an eco guardian and what exactly that is. So this is Race Rocks. This is the main island. It is is pretty much as far south as you can go off the coast of Vancouver Island. So it's just off the coast of Metchosin, but it is fully surrounded by water, so not connected to the mainland or main island in any way. And it's a little bit, you can see sort of what it looks like living there. So we've got the lighthouse tower itself. Everyone, when I say I work out as an eco guardian out there, people often assume that I live in the tower. That is not the case. I do live in one of those little houses there when I spend time out on the rocks. I've tried to condense the history of Race Rocks itself as brief as I possibly could. I'll share the Race Rocks website at the end of this presentation, but it is a really great resource for the history of Race Rocks. And there's so many stories that have happened there, and there's books and there's photos from as far back as you can possibly go. So do look into that if you're interested. But basically, in 1860, on December 26th, Race Rocks Lighthouse was lit for the first time. It was built from Scottish granite that was brought over in ships as ballast and then used to make the lighthouse tower itself. And unfortunately for a ship called the Nanette, it was lit 3 days too late because the Nanette ran aground and sank shortly before it was lit. One of many shipwrecks in the area, which is why the lighthouse was put there in the first place. And then fast forward to 1997, the Coast Guard automated the lighthouse, meaning that there was no longer a need for a lighthouse keeper anymore. That being said, Pearson College out in Metchosin noticed the need to provide protection, and they utilized the island and the reserve for learning purposes and diving and all sorts of really great things. And they wanted to protect that heritage site itself. So Pearson College took over a lease from BC Parks and have continued staffing the lighthouse or the ecological reserve ever since. So fast forward again until now, that Eco Guardian program is still running strong, and Race Rocks remains fully staffed by an Eco Guardian year round. So essentially, very, very similar to a lighthouse keeper, just not through Coast Guard or the Canadian Coast Guard, where the other lighthouses are run by. So just an old blueprint and some old photos. The structures on the main rock there have definitely changed, with the exception of the lighthouse itself. So those older buildings are no longer there, and they're the new houses that you saw in the previous slide. So pretty cool to see how it's changed over the years. Like I mentioned, there's a couple really cool books that show a lot of these pictures and stuff, and then also the Race Rocks website as well. And then just these are off the Race Rocks blog. As an eco guardian, one of the things we do is upkeep a blog while we're there. So if you go to the website, you can kind of see what we get up to. Most of us update it pretty regularly. But the Pearson College students come out for all sorts of things. They help with cleanup. They do exams out there. I've been lucky enough to have a group of them out there for a week with me, staying in one of the other houses. So really great learning for them as well. And just, yeah, really great overall. Okay, so I'm going to touch a little bit on the biodiversity at Race Rocks, but if you haven't already picked up on it, marine mammals are kind of where I thrive. So I'll touch a little bit about what's under the sea and then some of the birds as well, because they're still pretty cool, but then I'll mostly focus on the marine mammals and how they use the reserve. So Race Rocks, as it's named, has some pretty high velocity tidal currents, and basically this results in this huge array of fish and invertebrates and so many creatures. I can't even begin to name them all, but I do have a few photos. These photos I did not take. Again, you'll hear me refer to the Race Rocks website throughout this, but there's actually a biodiversity page that lists and has pictures and information on everything that has ever been spotted at Race Rocks, whether it's something that's super common or whether it's something that they've seen once. It's a really good resource for just sort of seeing how much is truly in the area. Now, these are the things that I have found while I'm there. I actually had to send this photo to the marine sciences teacher over at Pearson and say, a bird dropped this, but I have no idea what it is. It is a gumboot chiton. I've now learned a lot more about them, and they're really cool. But when it's on your cement path and you didn't put it there and you are on a rock alone in the middle of the ocean, you're like, oh my gosh, what is this? Where did it show up from? But that's not the only thing that have shown up. We get octopus quite often. The sea lions love to eat them. This unfortunate octopus was no longer an octopus. It only had one tentacle left. But after the sea lions were done with it, it became a feast for the birds. So everything was eaten, and then just some little visitors I had in my daily water sample as well. So moving on to the birds. So Race Rocks is a really important nesting ground for gulls, pigeon guillemots, oyster catchers, and a whole bunch of other birds that build their nests and lay their eggs at Race Rocks. And then we also see migratory birds and other species that aren't commonly seen in BC. Like I said, birds aren't totally my area of expertise, so I'm not as good at realizing or figuring out what should be there, what is uncommon. But I have learned a lot about birds through my time there. So these are just a few of the photos I've taken while being out there. You can just look in any direction while you're out on the reserve and see such an array of wildlife. And they're all busy doing something else. The eagles are always hunting. There's mating that's going on. You can see the gull in the top corner is starting to build a nest. The gulls will make nests all over the ground and then get really upset if you walk anywhere near them. They're just starting to build their nests now, but come the sort of end of May and then throughout June, they are very, very protective of them. I've seen them swoop down on elephant seals and things that they definitely don't stand a chance on, but they will protect their nests at all costs. And there is a picture to prove it. They have really cool eggs. They're really speckly. I always found that fascinating. And if you're wondering, the hard hat that I am wearing is solely due to the birds. They will fly directly into your head if you walk past their nests. And given that they build their nests and lay their eggs all over the main property there, you pretty much can't walk anywhere without being at least a few meters from a nest or eggs. But I don't blame them because they produce a very, very adorable result. And I just love that they're as equally speckled as their eggs are. So I forgive them for the dive bombing for the most part. I always like to include this picture when I'm talking about race rocks. I sent it to one of the eco guardians that is far more of an expert on birds than I am. And I think she told me there's like at least 3 or 4 different species of gull in this photo, but also different age classes. And I'm so impressed by her knowledge and all of the people out there who know birds that well. So still learning the different species of gulls was new for me, but I just like this picture because when I first took it, I didn't think anything of it until I showed her at a later date and she was naming all the different types of gulls. So I like to include that one. And then my favorite at all, favorite of all, which was completely shocking to me, is that we see quite a few brown pelicans. I don't know about anyone on this meeting, but I always thought that pelicans were far more of a tropical species. I've only ever seen them in Mexico prior, so thought they were lost at first, but they're definitely not. I've seen quite a few of them over the time I've spent at Race Rocks. They usually just fly by in big flocks, but this group actually landed on the rocks outside my bedroom window, which is a pretty cool way to have my morning coffee, but I'll always get excited when they fly over. And then moving on to my favorite part of all is the marine mammals, which we're very lucky to have a very wide array of marine mammals out at Race Rocks, including some pretty cute little stellar sea lions. So to touch just on the species to start that we see, so pinnipeds, so those are our seals and our sea lions. We see California sea lions, stellar sea lions, harbor seals, elephant seals, and very, very rarely we will see northern fur seals, which I'll touch on in a minute. In this photo, the blonder sea lion up at the top, that's a stellar sea lion. The one in the middle is a California sea lion, and then the little one off to the right there is a northern fur seal. And then for our cetaceans, we see killer whales or orca, humpback whales, gray whales, minke whales, harbor porpoises, Dall's porpoises, and Pacific white-sided dolphins. For the purpose of this presentation, I'll just talk in depth a little bit more about the killer whales and the humpback whales. And of course, we have sea otters. I should actually probably change this just to say sea otter, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. So our harbor seals. So these are sort of based in my experience for the population. I can go into a little bit of detail on the census and the numbers that we see a few slides down the way here. But on average, we count them at low tide when we're doing a census, and you see anywhere from sort of 30 to 100 of them. They like to howl out on the rocks, and they are often found on the surrounding smaller islands. They're a little bit shy and elusive, so they don't come quite up to the island where the house is as frequently. And they all start giving birth in June, so we're getting very close to pupping season now, and that will continue through the summer. And harbor seal mums and their pups separate around 4 to 6 weeks of age for those pups, so they don't spend that much time with them at all. Just a few photos, because I can't not. They're one of my favorite species, no matter how common they are, and I work with them at the Marine Mammal Rescue Center on a daily basis, and I still just love them no matter what. They're pretty great. Maybe not as much as elephant seals, but we do get elephant seals as well. So fewer in number, sort of anywhere from 1 to 9 at a time. Sometimes we don't have any at all. And while it is a mix of females and males, there's only usually one male at a time. If another male shows up, whoever is the alpha of the two will sort of push out the other male. And we're actually really lucky that Race Rocks is the northernmost breeding and pupping ground for northern elephant seal. So pups are born at Race Rocks throughout the winter. This past year, we didn't have any pups born, but we have seen them born there previously, which is pretty cool to see. And elephant seal pups will wean from their mothers, pretty similar to harbor seal, so around 4 weeks of age. And this is a photo taken by one of the other eco guardians, which is one of my favorites. They're pretty gross. They're usually covered in some sort of fluid and flies and who knows what, but they are so curious and so goofy, and they'll come up onto the grass and just sort of spend time on the pathway. And you definitely have to watch where you're walking when you're walking around the site. We have some fencing that keeps the sea lions and other pinnipeds out, but these guys will come up under it. And because there's only a few of them, they kind of just have their free roam of the property, but you definitely have to know where they are before you start walking around because they're pretty big. And they're very curious. They're kind of always watching. They want to know what you're up to. And just, we always kind of keep our distance from them the best that we can. They also go through their molt while they're at Race Rocks. So you can see this picture on the left. This female elephant seal is just finishing her molt. So elephant seals go through something called a catastrophic molt, where they shed their fur, but they also shed the top layer of their skin. So if anyone is familiar with Emerson, who is an elephant seal that likes to molt in Victoria, but also likes to cause trouble by taking himself into the roadways of Oak Bay and all sorts of places that he shouldn't. He has been relocated a couple of times by the Department of Fisheries, but they will molt usually in the same area for about a month. It's called a catastrophic molt for a reason. It tends to they'll lose quite a bit of weight. They'll get wounds, sometimes abscesses and other sores. It's a perfectly natural process, but it can definitely be a little bit alarming to look at, and they get pretty nasty looking. But that skin and fur just comes off in big sheets, like you can see in my hand there on the right side, which is, I always find it fascinating. Some people find it gross, but I like it. The California sea lion, so we see them year round, but fall and winter censuses, we see over 1,000 of them at a time. It's all males. They migrate from California up to BC and spend a lot of time at Race Rocks. They're very loud. You definitely need earplugs when you're there during the fall, but they're very vocal, and they have that stereotypical barking sound that people often associate with seals, but it's actually just the California sea lions that make that sound. And they're found on the main island and then all the little rocky islands around within the reserve as well. So they're pretty much covering every spare inch of land that they can, as you can see here. And they'll be out of the water for sometimes over 24 hours. They just pretty much do nothing but lie exactly like they're lying all day long. Looks like a pretty great way to spend their life, if you ask me. And then our stellar sea lions, so also seen year round, but more in the fall and winter, a little less than the California sea lions, sort of over 500 when they're at their most. And with these guys, we see males and females, and lately we've seen an increase in young pups and nursing pups, but we don't see pups born there at this time. So it's not technically a rookery at this point. They have more of like a deep growl. They sound like a true terrestrial lion. And their young animals sound, I think, similar to a goat. They always kind of have this like bah sound. And them as well, they are also found on all areas, particularly the main island as well. So when I'm living out there, I definitely have a lot of friends around me. And then there you can see one of the younger animals and then one of the older, larger males. And then just to show the difference between stellar and California sea lions, because people always ask me this, the stellars are significantly larger when they're full grown. Often they are more of a sandy, lighter color, but not always. I just like to show the difference between the two because it's pretty significant when you see them next to each other like that. And then for seals, I mentioned these were rare, and I meant it. So the last one prior to 2024 that was seen hauled out on Race Rocks was in 1980. And then on New Year's Eve of 2024, so just this past December, I went out to do my morning walk around the property and came across this guy, which was very exciting for me. So I took some photos of him, and by some, I probably took over 1,000 in the span of 24 hours, but I was just so blown away that he was there. We see them in BC. They're a pelagic species, so they're usually typically offshore in deeper waters. Not totally unusual to see them, but at Race Rocks, it's not something that we see very often, if ever. But this animal has been seen since, and I think he was seen a couple weeks ago, hauled out in the same area. So I'm heading back out to Race Rocks on Friday, and I'm very, very excited to see if he's going to be around for the next couple weeks, which is pretty cool. I just love the comparison photos. And then sea otters, a little less information for these guys because it's really just one sea otter. His name is Ollie. We don't usually see sea otters this far south, We have noted a few others over the years that will kind of pass through and continue on. But for the most part, it's just Ollie. And he'll come and go, but we see him pretty often. And he'll utilize mostly the kelp beds and anywhere else he can kind of wrap himself up in and hang out. And we know it's Ollie because he has a very pronounced pink scar on his nose. So that's how we're able to, whenever we see a sea otter, determine whether or not it's him. And 9 times out of 10, it's always him. He's pretty great. And you'll always find him just sort of wrapped up in the kelp somewhere to avoid drifting out to sea in the strong race rocks currents. For the humpback whales, so we see them during their migration. We see really large numbers in the fall. So I was out there in October and was seeing anywhere from 30 to 40 humpbacks a day. And they're very active. They're lunge feeding, they're breaching, they're tail lobbing. You really can't look in any direction at this time of year and during the fall and not see a spout or a whale doing something fun. Typically we see them traveling alone, but sometimes you'll see 2 or 3 of them at a time. And you'll see them on the horizon, in and around the reserve. They'll go right past the jetty because it's pretty deep right off the front there. So yeah, they're pretty much everywhere, which is always exciting. And then the killer whales, we do see these year round, especially the transients. In my experience, I've seen them more frequently in the summer and fall, but that probably differs for other eco-guardians as well. And they'll be traveling, they're hunting, they're breaching. Most often we see the transients, which are the mammal-eating killer whales. So as you can imagine, with thousands of sea lions at Race Rocks, there's plenty of feeding opportunities. So sometimes they put on quite a show. Usually we see them in 2s or 3s, but we'll often see families traveling together, so you'll get some larger numbers as well. And then if we have southern residents, it's going to be larger ponds as well. And same as the humpbacks, they'll be in and around the reserve, and they will utilize and hunt within the reserve as well. Just some photos over the years. This is, I mentioned I was going to show you my first favorite photo of out at Race Rocks, in addition to the one that I put at the beginning. This was taken back in October by someone that was on a whale watching boat with a very good camera and lens. They were all following the rules. They were far enough back, but took this incredible photo that ended up showing up on I think it was like a Facebook page later in the day that someone had posted it. And the reason why I love this photo is because if you zoom in, you can see me and my dad on the balcony. And we were watching this incredible show the whole time. And the one photo I didn't get was this breach. And later in the day, yeah, someone put it in a Facebook group and was like, oh God, this awesome breach of this killer whale outside of Race Rocks. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the one picture I didn't get, and I happened to be in the background of it. So this is officially my favorite photo. My dad was out visiting for a couple of days, so he got a great show, and I think we both have it framed in our houses now. And this was my view on the other side of it. So someone on that boat that took the photo just outside the reserve there, and they were hunting just on the outskirts of the reserve. So one of my favorite memories. And then I thought I'd talk a little bit about my role as an eco-guardian and some of the responsibilities that I have. So I'm not the only one that does this job. Like I mentioned, I do work full-time for the Marine Mammal Rescue Center. So there are a few different people that do this, and we all do it for varying lengths of time. The shortest period I've ever stayed out there was for 5 days, just to cover sort of like a gap between other people. And the longest I've been out there is for 6 weeks. And so other people tend to do similar time periods, just depending on what's needed. So some of the responsibilities that I have, and I'll touch on them each one as I go here, but the census, we do a lot of monitoring, reporting, upkeep, maintenance, energy related tasks, and a whole lot of cleaning as well. So I thought I'd show you what the census looks like. So we count marine mammals and we also count birds. And we do this once a week. And if you're interested, you can see it on the Race Rocks website as well. And I've just included little snippets, and I've stuck with just the marine mammals for the purpose of this presentation for how the numbers can look throughout the year. So these are 4 different censuses that I did personally. So you can see in March, we only had 18 California sea lions. June, we had 30. October, we had 1,052. And January, it dipped back down. We're sitting at 182. So You can see how it really changes throughout the year for the sea lions, especially. Same thing, March, we had 16 stellar sea lions. June, we had 8. October, 312. And we actually had a little bit more in January, 339. And this can depend on the time of day that you're doing the count as well, and what's going on in the water. And the weather seems to take, I always find the California sea lions go in the water when it's raining. So it all kind of varies, but just a little snapshot of it. Harbor seals definitely dip. We see anywhere from, like I said, kind of 30 to 100. You can see a few months there were 145-ish, and then dip down to 20 something in January. Elephant seals, obviously lower numbers, and then sea otters, just the one. And sometimes he hides on the far side of other rocks. So usually Ollie the sea otter is always around somewhere. It's just whether or not we can see him when you're doing a survey. We do a lot of monitoring, so there's a lot of fishing restrictions within the reserve itself. A lot of ecotourism vessels come through, private vessels as well, so just boaters passing by. So part of our job is to keep an eye on what's going on. We can always radio people to say, hey, make sure you're giving the sea lions some space. We never want to cause any sort of disturbance. And same thing with things like fishing, if they're fishing in areas they're not supposed to. And then obviously reporting that to the correct authorities if we don't receive a response or change in behavior when people are doing those things. Another part of monitoring is these sea lions and seals and everything else that has tags and brands, and they can be tagged and branded for a few different reasons. So there's a few programs in the States that will brand sea lions for research purposes or tag them. Other rescue centers, especially ours in Vancouver as well, we will tag animals before they get released. There are different types of satellite tags that people might use. So part of our job is when we see this is to report it to the people who are tracking that. So we have a pretty big database that we can submit our findings to and make sure that it gets to the right people. And usually you get sort of rewarded with some pretty cool information to figure out what kind of studies that are being done. A lot of time it's just distribution and habitat use kind of thing. So seeing a elephant seal, say, that was tagged down in California that then shows up at Race Rocks later in the year, you can be like, okay, so this little tiny elephant seal has now come all the way from California up to Race Rocks. And that's really cool for the researchers to know as well, because they know that that sea lion or seal that they tagged has made it a certain distance and is still going strong. So that's a pretty cool part of being out there. And then the not so fun part is also monitoring and reporting things like entangled sea lions. So one of the jobs out there, if we see this, we report it to Fisheries and Oceans Canada, but it's also the Marine Mammal Rescue Society that will go out and disentangle these animals in collaboration with Fisheries and Oceans, which is also where I work with the rescue center. So often it is a matter of reporting it to ourselves and then also making sure fisheries is aware so we can get a response out as quickly as possible. So entanglement is a really huge threat to sea lions. We see packing straps, fishing gear, you name it, they will probably want to play with it if they can swim through it. They're very curious, and often these things get stuck through, of course, no fault of their own. With these guys, they tend to move around quite a bit, so we often try to get as many reported sightings as we can to make sure we see where they're going so that we can get out there and help them as soon as we can. This one here was Gilbert, named for the gill net that he was entangled in, and thankfully we were able to fully remove this material. The rescue center went out and Fisheries and Oceans did as well with support from Pearson College and their vessel. And we were able to fully remove that. And I've got photos proof in just a minute here. And I've got this information at the end as well, but these are the phone numbers to call if anyone ever comes across an animal, any marine mammal in distress, but entanglements as well. So as I mentioned, the team came out and we used sedation to dart and disentangle the sea lion. So we used an anesthetic drug combination to sedate the animal. We removed all of the gill net that was around his neck, in his mouth, and causing some serious damage. And then we also tagged him and provided some pain management and some antibiotics. And then we released him and reversed the sedation. And I was very lucky to be out there at the time while this was happening. So while the rest of the team went back to Vancouver, I was still living out at Race Rocks and could monitor him over the next week or so. And he does still have a pretty severe wound. Those actually heal up pretty quick. The salt water does a really good job at helping out with that. And he was much more active by the time I left, which was really great. And he does have 2 flipper tags. They're not satellite tags, but they're big and they're bright and they're orange. And so people can report those if they ever see him again. So we're hoping he comes back to Race Rocks next October as well. There's a lot of upkeep that goes on. So Coast Guard, they still run and maintain the lighthouse, the foghorn, and the helipad, but we're responsible for pretty much the rest of that. There's a lot of maintenance that goes on. We've got a big diesel generator. I'll get into that in a second. We pump up seawater to put in our desalinator to make fresh water on the island as well. So all of these machines, and then you mix in some salt water, so they all require quite a bit of maintenance and upkeep. Lots of fuel runs as well. Like I said, we've got a diesel generator that powers the batteries that power the house. We also have solar panels, so depending on the time of year, we'll sort of dictate what energy source we're using the most. Come summer, we rarely use the generator. Winter, we're using it every day. So just kind of depends. And as you can imagine, all of those things need upkeep as well. And there's a lot of cleaning. When you have thousands of birds and thousands of sea lions, you can imagine there is poop everywhere. So the solar panels are not going to work very well if they are covered in bird poop. So we go up to the roof about once a day during this time of year when there's a lot of birds around and make sure that is clean. And then also some pressure washing as well, just to keep things safe. We will also chop firewood, so any big logs that wash up on shore we'll use and dry out for driftwood. And then that is our desalinator machine there as well. So that requires maintenance and then daily running to make that fresh water that we use. I do a lot of lawn and garden maintenance as well. I try to keep things as natural as possible out there, but some pretty cool things like this. I believe these were the wheels from the original foghorn way back in the day, and the bricks as well. So this was a project I took on back in March with the help of some very motivated and wonderful students from Pearson College that helped me sort of clear it all out. So kind of depends on the day what you're doing out there. Some days have more maintenance than others. Some days you're gardening in the sun, and then some days you're doing none of that because there's a pod of killer whales hunting on a sea lion. So you kind of drop everything and sit on a rock with a camera instead, which admittedly are my favorite kind of days. And then also monitoring and keeping an eye on the elephant seals and other animals that are in the area. So like I mentioned, the elephant seals will come under the fencing that we have, and we kind of just let them be wherever they want to be. This was one of the juvenile males that was here at Race Rocks last year. And he got into trouble wherever he could find it. It was kind of like babysitting a toddler that had too much sugar, because he just, every time I looked outside, he was into something else. So obviously this isn't an animal I'm going to run up to and scare him off, but it does make your heart stop for a second when he is trying to get in the doors of your only freshwater source on the island. So thankfully, he was more interested in the sawhorse than anything else, which at the time was helping with a broken latch on the door. So I let him be, and he just kind of played around with that for a while, and he was very, very proud of himself for getting into that. But yeah, that is just not really, it's an unofficial job to keep an eye on the troublemakers of the island. But again, one of my favorites because they're forever entertaining. And I think, oh, and then I included this. One of the other really cool experiences I had while I was out there was last year when we got a really amazing Northern Lights show. Bit of light on the horizon there, but other than that, that was probably one of the best spots to be with a 360 view during the Northern Lights last year. And with that, I think I'm done. So yeah, again, a huge thank you to Pearson College for running this program. Like I said, check out their website and the Race Rocks website as well for the blog and all of that information and history and all sorts of really great photos. And then there's my contact info if anyone wants to contact me for whatever reason or has questions that they remember later on. And then those are those numbers to call again if you find a marine mammal in distress. And that is all for me.